Welcome to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson, and I'm here with Gail Berman, one of the producers for Baz Luhrmann's Elvis Presley biopic, Elvis. Gail, talk to me about the inception of this incredible Elvis story and how it just got off the ground and how you ended up teaming with Baz Luhrmann.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy to fill you in on that lengthy 10-year journey. Um, I, when Mark Graboff, who is a friend of mine, left NBC, he went to a company called Core Media, and that was owned by Apollo. And Core Media owned the Elvis estate at that time. And I was intrigued by what Core Media owned because they also owned American Idol, and obviously I had had a significant part in the life of American Idol. And it got me to thinking, hey, what else do they control? And it turned out that they controlled the Elvis estate. And I sat with my staff and said, what could we do with Elvis that hasn't been done before? Is it a film? Is it a musical? Is it a play? Is it what 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 is the story there that hasn't been told? And we came up with a single name. Wouldn't it be great to see what Baz Luhrmann would do with Elvis? And I thought it was such a good idea that I picked up the phone and I called Mark Graboff and I said, Baz Luhrmann, Elvis. And he said, that's a good idea. And I said, well, let me run with that. And he said, go. And then I called, same day, Robert Newman, Baz's agent. And I said, Robert, I have an idea for Baz. He was, I think, in post at that time on Great Gatsby. And Robert said, what's the idea? I said, Baz Luhrmann and Elvis. And he said, that's a good idea. And that's how it started.
And clearly, there's no film about Elvis without Elvis. So I assume one of the most daunting tasks had to be finding the right person to portray him. And thankfully, you find Austin Butler, who just gives a star-making performance. What was that process like in finding the right person to play that role?
Well, Baz has a very lengthy process that he goes through with actors. In the case of Austin, it was over a 6-month period.
Wow.
Austin submitted a tape of him singing uh, to in a bathrobe, but singing and playing the piano. And Baz got intrigued by that. And over a 6-month period of time, they worked on his audition. And in July of 2019, I got a call from Baz's office. I was in New York, he was in Brooklyn, and he said, on Wednesday, come, I'm going to show you the various screen tests. And I went and I sat with them and we went through each of the screen tests, and Austin was saved for last. I had no idea who Austin was. I had no idea the order that Baz was interested in these actors. But as I watched each of the screen tests, it became clear to me that this young man at the end was the guy. I mean, it wasn't a contest. It really wasn't.
Was there ever a discussion or a feeling like you had to get some big A-list star for this, or did you start out from the beginning saying, you know what, let's just have a clear slate and see who works best?
Well, we we always thought and had many discussions that if we couldn't find Elvis, there was no reason to do it, and that was the thing that Baz was most concerned about. I will say that I had separate conversations with Warner Brothers about the idea of who could play Elvis, and I had encouraged them to think that we could go with an unknown if we had someone like a Tom Hanks, believe it or not, that's true, in the role of the Colonel. And so Um, Ultimately, after I saw the screen test, we all flew to LA and we showed Warner Brothers the screen tests in the same order that I was shown them, and they it really was, it just was an absolute. He just he just did it, and they really didn't hesitate. I have to say, Toby and Courtney and Kevin were all on board for it.
And it's such an epic journey that we're taking on over so many decades. What was sort of the biggest challenge, do you think, from your point of view on from a production standpoint?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, Baz and CM, Catherine Martin, are such an amazing team. And the meticulous nature of how they approach each and every facet of each decade was so remarkable for me to watch and listen to, because obviously we were telling pretty much a full life story in this movie. Um, from the time we meet Elvis when he is in Tupelo to the time uh, he dies, and we see his last performance. Um, the work and the meticulous nature of that work that went into it was absolutely remarkable. I'd never seen anything like it.
What was it like for you when you saw it up on the big screen for the first time, when everyone was there? Were you at the premiere, or what was your story?
Well, I was at the premiere, but I was the first time we saw the first cut. I was with Courtney and Kevin. I think Toby was there. Pretty sure Toby was there too. We were in the Steve Roth Theater at Warner Brothers. It was freezing cold in the theater, that I remember because I didn't bring a sweater. And we watched the first cut. And even at the first cut, which was significantly longer than the film, even at that first cut, um, you could see a great, great film in there, and see Austin and Tom and what they were doing and what Baz was trying to do. And it was, while it was a work in progress, it was really something. It was amazing to see it on the big screen too. And in that theater, it's got a big screen and, a few people watching it. It was very monumental. For me, it was an incredible part of the journey.
And I've always been a huge lover, and Elvis died before my time, but I was obviously aware of his music. I even knew about his musical influences. But for me, aside from some personal stories, that I'd never heard of the Colonel, so that was something new for me.
Oh, wow.
Um, and I'm curious for you, what did you learn about Elvis throughout this process, or did your perspective about him change
Well,
at all?
I wound up loving him so much more than I did when it started.
Mm.
Because what I realized and what I got to see realized in this movie was what a rebel he really was, what a unique and talented and young, energetic person he was. And he got he wound up finding fame and fortune and ultimately destruction through the same man. And that story, well, I knew some of it over the years. Um, the telling of that story was the remarkable thing, that when I first met with Baz in New York, um, the movie you saw was the vision he had that he pitched me when we sat for the first time together for 3 hours.
Wow.
And I was so excited after I left the building that I was on I was in the West Village, and I walked on air all the way to the Upper East Side to 80th Street. because all the way over on Third Avenue, because I just was like, oh, this is why I'm still in show business. You get a moment like this with a man like that, and you really remember that creativity and that moment where you hear somebody say something and you know that's gonna, if all the things could come together, that what he said was great. And that was really true.
Wow. And since I mentioned him and we've talked a little bit, Tom Hanks, what was it like to have him be part of this cast, and what did he bring? Just a total transformation. What did he bring to the film?
Well, Tom was my dream casting for the Colonel because, frankly, Tom had never played a character like this before. I'm a huge fan of his. I think he's a brilliant actor, and I wanted to see him play this part. I wanted to see what a, what a man, an actor like him, could do with the Colonel. And I don't know, I saw it in my head, so it stayed with me. He was he was in my head the whole time. And when he agreed to sign on, it was, I mean, it was really too much almost. It was too good to be true. And of course, we all know the story of what happened shortly before we started filming. Um, Tom and Rita both came down with the coronavirus, which we learned about, which ultimately shut the movie down until August. I mean, we would all learn about that virus quite quickly after that date. But, it was very frightening. We didn't know the consequences of the virus at that time. And, it was a great worry for Tom and Rita, and they're getting well. Um, and then, of course, when COVID happened, everything shut down. And, it was a great, wonderful thing to be involved with bringing back the movie. Because when Tom agreed to come back to do it, things went back into a COVID like pre production period.
Mm.
And we were trailblazers in that because there was no roadmap yet to how to do that. And I will say, and I have said this before, I got to see the great work of Baz and CM as producers during this period because, they were on the phone, and Baz was on the phone with the Ministry of Health in Australia. And I mean, it was just amazing things that were happening. And, the Herculean job of of everybody getting behind figuring out how to do this. And it was not a little project. I mean, it was a massively big film. And they just were remarkable partners, remarkable people, and remarkable artists. I have to say that Austin, who had stayed in Australia and kept working on the part, not knowing whether it would ever come to be, and Tom agreeing to come back and do it. And I think he is amazing in the role. I think it's unsettling for people to see Tom Hanks in a role like this. And it's very uncomfortable for some people. I've heard that comment, but I think that's what, because he's incredibly good at what he's doing.
Uh, and the estate has been extremely supportive of the film. Both Priscilla Presley and Lisa Marie Presley have showered the film with praises. Have you been able to speak with them, or have you ever spoken with them? And what does their support mean to you?
Well, I was just with Priscilla the other day. I'll tell you that I met with Priscilla during the development process, and she was very unsure about what this would all mean. And we did the film, we made the film, and then she and Jerry Schilling were the first people to come to see it, and um, we put them in in a small screening room at Warner Brothers, and with a female security guard who went in with them to see the movie. And I waited outside, and I paced, and I wound up putting my head into a screening that was going on, and I came back and I was pacing. And I could hear toward the end that the movie was coming to an end. And I was so nervous that my palms were completely sweaty because it could have gone any way. I had no idea how it was going to go. And Priscilla, at first, the female security guard opened the door, and I could see she was crying. And I thought to myself, well, she liked the movie. So and then behind her came Priscilla and Jerry, and they were both sort of shaking their heads, going, blown away, just blown away. And we talked for a while, and she was really overwhelmed. Baz was on a plane at that time, so I was texting him on the plane. And then Priscilla wrote a beautiful email to everybody afterwards. And a few days later, Lisa came to see the film in a much more private fashion. And she spoke with Baz afterwards, not to me. And she could barely, she was quite overwhelmed. And then over time, they came back, the whole family came to see it again, actually on Mother's Day. Lisa and her children and Priscilla, everybody came to see it again on Mother's Day. And they loved the film so much that they decided to get behind it. They had no obligation. I want to be clear about this. They had no obligation to do that. They didn't have, there was no remuneration for them doing that. It was them doing it because they loved it. They loved they loved the movie. They loved the depiction of Elvis and the story that Baz told.
You've been in this business for decades. At what age did you realize that you wanted to become a producer or be in the filmmaking world?
Well, I had graduated from college from the University of Maryland, and a friend called me shortly thereafter and said she'd seen a show at the Olney Theater, which is the summer theater of Catholic University, and it was called Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. Did I know anything about it? I knew a little bit about it at the time, and she said she was in Baltimore, and she said, "Do you want to come?" I was in New York. Would you like to come and work with me on this, whatever that meant? And I was coming back to Baltimore, which is where my parents were living at the time. And I met with her, and we decided to do it. That was in 1979. And Joseph opened at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. in April of 1980. And I, the rest is sort of history, but the desire to keep growing. So I produced in theater for 10 years. I was part of the team that started HBO's Comedy Channel. Then I came to Los Angeles and worked with Sandy and Dolly. And then I went to just do Buffy and Angel, which I had started over at Sandollar. And then I went to Regency, which is where I did Malcolm in the Middle and Roswell. And then I got that infamous call from Peter Chernin to come to run the Fox Broadcasting Company. That was an amazingly unexpected. I'd always been pretty independent producer. This was a very big left turn for me, and I loved it. It was great. And then I got the opportunity to go to Paramount Pictures, which was not great, but it was an incredible learning experience for me that allowed me to know that I had enough knowledge to start to get in the film business as well.
And you mentioned Sandy and Dolly, and by that you meant Dolly Parton. And we briefly mentioned offline that I just caught Unlikely Angel from 95. I can't quite remember the year. But it stars Dolly Parton and you
94,
produced,
95, yeah.
yeah, and you produced that. And there's a little bit of a connection. I mean, I remember hearing the story that Elvis wanted to do I Will Always Love You, and Dolly wouldn't sell him the rights. So
No,
he
no,
didn't,
right.
so he didn't end up doing it.
The
What's a
Colonel,
Dolly story that you have?
well, I, um, the Colonel wouldn't let Elvis sing that song because Dolly
Mm.
retained the rights to it, and Elvis, the Colonel was in charge of Elvis getting his name on all of the music, and so he wound up not doing the song. Um, Stories about Dolly, I can. This is what I'll tell you about her. I don't think I've ever met a more remarkable woman than
Mm.
Dolly Parton. She's talented in every single way. She's a loving human being. She's a terrific businesswoman. She's smart as could be. She's amazingly beautiful and talented. And she has a grace about her that um, is it's very amazing. And one day I went to her house and I got to meet her husband. Very few people have ever met Carl. I met her husband, and Dolly had big rubber gloves on, and I was like, What are you doing?" She was pulling pork. So she had cooked a pork, and she was pulling pork, and she was wearing rubber gloves to do it. And I thought, well, must remember this because seeing Dolly in rubber gloves pulling pork was probably a unique experience, and it certainly was for me.
Well, congratulations on just your career, but this film, Elvis, it's just being welcomed with such tremendous reception from, I mean, incredible box office numbers. Critics are applauding it. So it's just doing so well. Thank you so much for stopping by Gold Derby. I
Thank
want to tell
you.
our viewers to go to goldderby.com, make your awards predictions, watch our interviews with more top contenders. And Gail, thanks so much for chatting with me today about Elvis.
Thanks, Denton. Thanks so much for supporting it.